Zechariah chapter 7, we're going to start reading together in verse 4. But I want to give you a little bit of background before we get there. What happens in the first 3 verses is a group of messengers arrive from the city of Bethel to Jerusalem, and they come to the temple, and they ask a simple question. And their question is, should we continue to fast in the 5th month of the year or not? Now, the historical background that's going on there is Zechariah is a post-exile prophet. That means that they have already been conquered by Babylon. They've already spent 70 years living in exile. They've already been taken captivity. Jerusalem's already been destroyed. The temple has already been destroyed. And what we know from historical context is that when the temple was destroyed, the Jewish people established a regular day of fasting. It was a memorial day to remember, to mourn the loss of the temple. And so every year for 70 years, on the day that the temple had been destroyed, they would have a day of mourning and fasting, a somber remembrance of what they had lost. But Zechariah is writing at a time when the temple is being rebuilt. And although it's probably not fully constructed yet in chapter 7, the practice of the temple has resumed. They're making animal sacrifices there. The worship of the temple has begun. And so their question in a nutshell is this. For 7 decades, we have remembered and grieved the loss of the temple. But now that we have a new temple, do we still need to grieve and mourn the loss of the first one? Or should we have more celebration? Do we need to keep this fast now that the new temple is open? That's their question in Zechariah chapter 7. And they're going to get an answer, but do you remember when you were a kid? And I'm glad you remember when you were a kid. Thanks, bud. Thanks for participating. You and Cammie. Do you remember when you were a kid and you asked your mom what you thought was a very innocent question? Mom, what are we having for dinner tonight? But you happened to ask that question on the wrong day and at the wrong time and in the slightly wrong tone of voice. And so all you wanted to know is like, are we having chicken or cheeseburgers for dinner tonight? And what you get was, what do you mean what's for dinner? I just gave you a snack an hour ago. I cooked you breakfast. I cooked you lunch. Make your own dinner. What are you making for dinner tonight? And you're going, oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. You ever have that experience before? Not me. My mom was perfect. But maybe with your mom you had that kind of experience. That's kind of what happens to these folks from Bethel. They come with what is an innocent enough question. God, what are we supposed to do? Now that the temple's open, how are we supposed to respond to these circumstances? And through the prophet Zechariah, God just unloads on them. So let's pick up reading here in verse 4 of Zechariah chapter 7. It says, "Then the word of the Lord of hosts came to me. Ask all the people of the land and the priests, when you fasted and lamented in the 5th and in the 7th months for these 70 years, did you really fast for me? When you eat and drink, don't you eat and drink simply for yourselves?" Okay, I want to pause for a minute so you understand what he's saying. His question is this: why do you even bother to ask me? When you started this fast, it was for your benefit anyway. When you throw feast and celebration, they're for your benefit anyway. You're not really concerned about the glory of God to begin with, so why are you bothering to come here and pretend like you really care what God wants? You started this fast because it makes you feel good about yourself. It makes you feel holy to have a day of remembrance. It makes you feel holy to have a special day where you remember what the temple used to be. And so you're doing this for your benefit. You never really cared what I wanted for you anyway, so why did you bother to ask now? All of this feasting and fasting was about how you felt and what you wanted, not about God's glory anyway. You can imagine the folks from Bethel taking a step back and going, all we did was wanted to know whether or not we were supposed to eat dinner tomorrow. Calm down. But God does not give them a chance to breathe. Zechariah continues in verse 7. "Aren't these the words the Lord proclaimed to the earlier prophets when Jerusalem was inhabited and secure, along with its surrounding cities, and when the southern region and the Judean foothills were inhabited?" In short, what he's saying is, hasn't God already told you what he wanted? Through the other prophets, the one who came before the exile. When God already sent his word, didn't he already tell you how you're supposed to act and live? Didn't he already tell you what to do? And what's going to come next in verses 8 through 11 is not so much a direct quote as it is a summary of the entire prophetic literature. The themes that Zechariah is going to hit on could be found in Micah chapter 6. They can be found in Hosea 4. They can be found in Hosea 6. They can be found in Amos 5. They can be found in Isaiah 57 and 50. They can be found throughout the prophets. And so he basically takes the central theme of the prophetic messages and condenses it into a couple verses and says, God already told you how to live. This is what it says here in verse 8. The word of the Lord came to Zechariah. The Lord of hosts says this, make fair decisions, show faithful love and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor, and do not plot evil in your hearts against one another. But they refused to pay attention and turned a stubborn shoulder. They closed their ears so they could not hear. Now, we read out of the CSB here usually. I like the translation, but man, they missed the boat on this one. The Hebrew of this verse has two just incredibly loaded theological words. The first one is the word mishpat, and it is most often translated justice. So when you read in the CSB here, and it says make fair decisions, those of you reading out of another translation might have something like administer justice, or govern justly, or rule with justice, because the word mishpat means justice. And for most of us, when we think of the word justice, we immediately go to a legal sense, right? You have committed a crime and the prosecutor's there to get justice. Someone ran into your car and wrecked your car, and you're going to sue them and get justice. Or maybe you've been wrongly convicted and you've been in jail and you're going to get your freedom and get justice. And we think of it in a legal sense. But biblically, justice has nothing to do with the courtroom. It has to do with the character of God. God is just. God treats people rightly. God treats people rightly all the time. He does not oppress people. He does not treat people unfairly. He's not vindictive against people. God is just at the core of his being, and it is tied to his goodness and righteousness. And so when it says act justly, it means make sure everyone's treated fairly. Make sure everyone is treated rightly, that no one is oppressed. Every culture has their group of people who are oppressed. The haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, the powerful and the weak. Zechariah lists his for you. The oppressed people in Zechariah's day, they're right there in verse 10. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor. The widows are oppressed because they have no husband to protect them, defend for them, or provide for them. Women can't own land. They can't have a job. They need a man to take care of them in Zechariah's day. Okay? So they have no husband to take care of them. The fatherless have no father to protect them, provide for them, defend them. The foreigner in the land have no king to protect them, provide for them, and defend them. The poor have no land and no resources to get ahead, to take care of themselves, to provide for themselves. In short, to practice justice means to take care of and stand up for those who cannot do it for themselves. To not let the weak among us become oppressed. The second word that's here, that's translated in the CSB as love, faithful love, some of you might have the word mercy, is the Hebrew word hesed. And it's translated all sorts of ways. Sometimes it's loving kindness, sometimes it's faithful love, sometimes it's mercy. But at its core, the most important use is that it is the word that is used to speak of God's covenant love. The way when the Bible says that you have not loved God, but he has chosen to love you. You have been unfaithful, but he has been faithful. You've turned your back on him and gone after other gods, but he has loved you anyway. That word for that covenant love is hesed. You can think about it this way. I know none of you would ever do this, but let's pretend for a moment that you move into town and you're moving into Dover or wherever, and you got neighbors real close, and you are the worst neighbor in the world. You break all of the neighbor. There's kind of like this unspoken covenant between neighbors, right? That there are certain things you do and don't do to be a good neighbor, and you are just the worst neighbor. You blow your leaves in their yard in the fall and make them clean them up. You take your dog for walks and let him do his business on their driveway. You throw loud parties at night with music blaring. You can go or sneak over at night and steal some apples off their tree without asking. Like you're just a terrible neighbor. And yet your neighbor chooses to be the best neighbor in the world anyway. When you're sick, they bring you some soup. That one time when you had surgery, they came over and mowed your lawn. When you're on vacation, they bring in your mail and pull your trash can up for you. They continue to do all the things a good neighbor does, even though you do not deserve it. That's hesed, faithful love, unfailing love, mercy that is undeserved. And so here's Zechariah 7 in a nutshell. They come to him and they say, God, what should we do? And God, through the prophet Zechariah, says, well, you have to make a choice. If this is about you, then you just keep right on doing whatever you want to do. You've always made it about you. You've never listened to my words in the past. So if this is about you, then you just do whatever you want. If fasting makes you feel good, then fast. If having a feast makes you feel good, then feast. If having church makes you feel good, then have church. You just do whatever you want. If this is about you, then you do whatever makes you feel comfortable. But if this is about me, if this is about God's glory, if Yahweh is going to be lifted high, then I've already told you what I wanted. I've been telling you for hundreds of years what I wanted. If this is about God, then I want you to administer justice and practice mercy. And I've been telling you that for centuries. And so you have to answer the question, who is this really about? It's an easy mistake to make. I can give it to you in this kind of example. Let's pretend that because I am a nearly flawless husband, they didn't laugh as much as first service. They must actually think highly of me. They all laughed at me first service. I decide I'm going to take my wife on a date this Friday. Things are starting to open up. It's been a long 3 months in our house between working and doing homeschooling with the kids, and we're going to go out, we're on a date, and I think I'm going to plan, she deserves something really special. And so I decide, the first stop, we're going to get cheeseburgers at Five Guys Burgers and Fries. Because what says romance better than a greasy cheeseburger and fresh cut French fries? It's one of my favorite places to eat. She'll be so happy to eat at my favorite place. And we haven't had a whole lot of time together. We've both been working and taking care of the kids. So maybe some place where we could walk and talk and visit, get some tickets to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Because what is better on a date night than 50-year-old football jerseys covered in sweat and mud? We can watch the video about the AFL-NFL merger. I can show her statistics of my favorite players. It'll be awesome. She'll love it. Then when we're all done, movie theaters are opening. Maybe we can find places that's showing one of the Star Wars movies. Not a lot of new content because she just hates Star Wars, but I love it, so it'll make her happy. Sounds great. Somewhere in the midst of that, it ceased to be about her, and it became about what made me happy. And see, the difference is I do know my wife, and I know her heart, and I know what brings her joy. And so if the date is going to be about her, then it needs to be about the things that bring her joy, not me. So we ended up at a place like this. This is one of our favorite places. We've been a handful of times. It's called 33 Bricks. It's up in Green. They serve some of the best salmon I've ever had in my life, if that's your thing. It's a contemporary, upscale place that I can afford. So it's a nice place. If we went for a walk, it wouldn't be the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We'd go somewhere with like a flower garden. My remote stopped working. There we go. An arboretum or a flower garden, somewhere where we could walk and talk, and that's more up her alley where she could see different things. We went to see a show. We'd get tickets somewhere and go watch a live performance. I've taken her to see the ballet. We've been to see the orchestra. We've been to E.J. Thomas. We've been to Playhouse up in Cleveland. You see, if the date's really going to be about her, if the goal is really to bring her glory and her honor and let her be the center of attention, then I have to know her heart and do the things that bring her joy. And so what Zechariah is saying, first to this delegation from Bethel, but also to us today is, do you know the heart of God? And if this faith journey you're on as a follower of Christ is about Him, then the answer to the question is, He has told you how to act, administer justice, and practice mercy. But if it's not about Him, then you just keep right on doing what you want to do. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does this have to do with today? What does this have to do with real life right now? I don't know if you've been watching the news recently. Life is messy at the moment. I've enjoyed some of the memes that have popped up online. This is one of my favorites. It says, me looking outside to see what chapter of Revelation we're doing today. Sometimes feels like that when you wake up and read the news report. Oh, good, there's an asteroid coming too. Yay for us. Or this one, 2020 outfits. We've got the threat of war in January, the fires in February, the disease in March, the quarantine in April, and now the riot gear for the month of May. That kind of feels like what our country's been like the last 5 months, doesn't it? All jokes aside, we are living in challenging times. And this is the part of the sermon where I know beyond a shadow of a doubt I'm going to say things you don't agree with. Because you cannot speak about what's happening in our world without offending someone anymore. Because everyone in this room is 1,000% sure that their point of view and that news article that they read is the one that's right and everybody else is crazy. So I understand that when I start talking about coronavirus and I start talking about quarantine and I start talking about racial tension, that many of you in the room are going to roll your eyes and go, Josh is crazy. I'm going to do my best to say things that I think we can state with 100% certainty and know full well that some of you are going to be mad at me. So some of you are like, I haven't been here in 3 months and I ain't coming back for 3 months. So just so you know, Josh, is your only chance. Here are some things I think we can say for sure about what's happening in our world right now. The coronavirus has killed a lot of people. If you want to go by the CDC count, in the month of April and May, 100,000 people died from COVID-19. If that were to continue for the full year, that would make it one of the deadliest things in our nation. The leading causes of death in our nation are cancer and abortion, both right around 600,000 deaths a year. That's the pace we're on with the coronavirus. It has killed a lot of people. And I'm aware that many folks think those numbers are inflated. They're putting false things on certificates. They're scamming for money. So I usually ask people, how much do you think they're inflating them? You think 1 out of 10 is a lie? 2 out of 10? 3 out of 10? How many do you think they're lying about? Because even if half of them are lies, even if it's 50,000 people in 2 months, that means the same number of people have died in 2 months from this as died in 9 months from the flu last year. It is killing a lot of people any way you cut it. There's a lot of funerals, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of fear around what's going on with coronavirus. The second thing I can say with absolute certainty is our response to coronavirus has caused a lot of pain. There are going to be some long-term consequences from what we've done. It's going to take our economy a long, long time to recover. People who spent their lives building small businesses may lose them and never get them back. People who've never had a hard time paying their bill are suddenly struggling to have ends meet. People who struggle with anxiety and depression have seen their symptoms go through the roof. The people who are living alone are struggling with this overwhelming sense of loneliness and fear. And so all of the shutdown hasn't been a perfect solution either, because it's caused a lot of pain, some of which we haven't even begun to understand yet. I think we can say both those things with certainty. A lot of people have died, and our response to it has caused a lot of pain too. And both things are really bad. I think we can say the same thing about racial tensions. I think I can say with 100% certainty, we have a race problem in our nation today. And I know our instinct is to go, it's 2020, we don't have those problems, nobody's getting lynched, Listen, not only can I show you countless statistics of wage gaps and incarceration rates and false conviction rates and all through the line, the way that race is still a problem for a lot of folks. I can share countless stories with you. I still remember sitting in the office of a principal. I worked with this one school. He's the only kid of color in the school building. And man, he was bullied more than, racial slurs written on his locker, notes passed to him, physically assaulted, bullied beyond belief. And he got kicked out of school one time for defending himself. And I remember sitting in the principal's office and in the superintendent's office just advocating for this kid, going, you don't understand what's going on here. Listen, I've seen it. I've seen the way his peers treat him. We don't have a race problem here. That would never happen at our school. And this kid was treated differently by his teachers, by his administrators, and by his peers because of the color of his skin. It still happens right here in our backyard. And not only does it still happen on an individual basis, it's happening on a systematic basis. And you probably have heard that word a lot on the news and kind of maybe rolled your eyes or struggled with it. So let me try to explain that to you from my own just kind of personal narrative here. My family moved to Ohio in 1988, and we were what you would probably call poor. Okay, my dad had been a preacher. My mom had never worked. We had lived in a parsonage up until that point. Which if you don't know what that means the church provides you with a house, but it also means that when you're getting ready to get out of the ministry, which my father was, you don't have a house to sell to buy your next house. So you have no equity, you have nothing. So we moved here with almost no money. My dad's first job was a part-time in-school suspension administrator. So he worked a couple of days a week with kids who were in school suspension. And my mom got a job as a secretary at a bank for farmers. The money wasn't exactly rolling in. And yet despite all of that, we managed to pay our bills, to build a 3-bedroom house on 1 acre of land in the best school district in the county. And in case you couldn't tell from looking at me, I didn't go hungry very often. Oh, are my TVs shorting out? Cool. I didn't go hungry very often. We always had enough to eat. We always had everything that we needed. So how did my parents, who had very little money and very little income, manage to feed us and build a nice house and provide for us? They didn't work extra hours. They were home. My dad coached my little league baseball team and my football teams. My mom was there to help with schoolwork and support me. How did we have this wonderful nuclear family without all the stress of poverty when we didn't have anything? And the answer is my grandpa's farm. My grandpa owns a several hundred acre farm in southeastern Ohio. And that acre of land that we built on, he gave to us. That food that we ate, the beef and the chicken and the vegetables that fed our family, it came off the farm. When money was a little tight, I know there were times where we're just going to go sell a steer, go sell a heifer, make a little bit of extra money to pay some bills, until we got on our feet and got established. And it enabled my parents to take care of us in ways that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Now, when we talk about that in terms of race, here's the question I have for you. My grandfather bought that farm in 1958. He purchased it from his father, who bought it in 1943 with a loan from the local bank. I don't know how much you know about banking practices, but what do you think are the odds that a black man walks into a bank in 1943 and gets a loan to buy a several hundred acre farm in southeastern Ohio? Almost none. What do you think the odds are in 1988 that my mom gets a job working as the main face of an office that lends money to farmers? In fact, when I talked to her this week, she said, we kind of had an unspoken policy that white farmers would never borrow money from a black person, so you could not work in the front of the office if you were not white. So when people talk about systematic racism, that's what they're talking about. Because otherwise, we move to Zanesville and we probably live in the city in an apartment that we have to rent. Mom and dad probably work extra jobs. No one's there to coach my little league team or to help me with my math homework when I'm struggling. And I don't know what my life looks like, but it doesn't look like what it looks like now. And my guess is if you trace your family history back, someone in your family borrowed money from a bank 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Someone in your family got a job as an executive at a company, that you too have benefited from that. And your family is in a better spot today. You don't need to feel guilty about that. You don't need to feel shame about that. You did nothing wrong, but you need to recognize that that's why we have a race problem in our nation. And what you're seeing on your TV, and we're not excusing it, destroying people's businesses, assaulting people, assaulting police officers, is not okay. We're not supporting any of that. But you need to understand that you're watching hundreds of years of anger boil over. And that it's not enough to go, they should stop that. We have to recognize that we have a problem in our nation on an individual level and on a systematic level. The last thing I think I can say with certainty, and this one's a little personal, so if I offend you, I'm sorry a little bit. I think I can say with certainty that most of us also have a race problem in our own hearts. I was going to show some pictures, but I just couldn't find any that I didn't find offensive. So if you would indulge me for a minute, close your eyes. Picture for a moment a white man in blue jeans, a t-shirt, and a ball cap with an AR-15 slung across his shoulder. When you see him, your first response is probably hunter, patriot, conservative. You've seen that guy 100 times on the news. You probably know people who look like him, and I would bet $1,000 you're not in the slightest threatened by him. Now picture the same man. Picture a black man in blue jeans and a t-shirt and a ball cap. Maybe the brim of his hat is straight instead of curved. Maybe his clothes fit a little bit different, but he's got the same rifle strapped across his shoulder. I guarantee your first thought is not hunter. Because even in our hearts, there are these bits of prejudice. And that's okay, because you're in good company. Peter was prejudiced against the Gentiles. James and John wanted to burn down Samaria. But we must be willing to confess that that is not right. That God does not want that. That God does not want us to treat folks differently because of how they look or for any other reason. For we are those who are to administer justice and practice mercy. So what does all this have to do with Zechariah chapter 7? I found myself asking the same question that they asked in the first few verses. God, what am I supposed to do in this world where this is a mess that we have been dealt, when things are falling apart this way? What in the world am I supposed to do? And I think he would give the same answer that he gave in Zechariah 7. It depends. Is this whole thing about you? Is your faith about you? Do you believe in Jesus so you don't have to go to hell? Do you come to church so you feel better? Is it about you? Because if it is, then keep doing whatever you want. Keep coming to church. We'll sing the songs that make you feel a little bit better. We'll read the scriptures that make you smile a little bit bigger. We'll preach the sermons that give you comfort for your hardship. And if it's about you, you just keep doing whatever you want. In a few weeks, we'll be able to have picnics again, and you can sit with all your friends and talk. And if it's about you, you just keep right on living however you want to live. But if your faith in Jesus Christ is about bringing glory to God, then he has told you what he expects from you. He expects for you to practice justice and mercy, to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, to defend those who cannot defend themselves. What does that mean for us today? It means we look at those affected by coronavirus and we help them. Those who are grieving because they lost a loved one, those who are afraid of the disease, and we're going to do whatever we can to accommodate them. We're going to 6 feet apart. If we need to wear a mask or sanitize our hands or whatever we need to do to make them feel, I'm going to sacrifice myself so that they feel comfortable. I'm going to visit with the lonely. I'm going to counsel those who are anxious and depressed. I'm going to give finances to help those who've lost their job. I'm going to see all the ways that this disease has hurt people, and I'm going to help those who cannot help themselves. And it means that in terms of this racial issue, I'm going to help those who cannot help themselves. I'm going to stand with the oppressed. It doesn't mean I'm going to justify their behaviors. It doesn't mean that I'm going to say it's okay to assault police officers or it's okay to destroy businesses. But it does mean that I'm going to recognize that there's a problem, and I'm going to spend my money helping support the oppressed and the minorities. I'm going to find some charities to give to that are taking care of those folks. I'm going to volunteer with organizations that mentor young men and young women of color because they need a way out. I'm going to look for ways to get them education. I'm going to look for ways to help those who cannot help themselves. And I'll be honest, most of us, if we were to go back and look at our lives the last 2 months and answer the question honestly, who has your life been about? Has it been about you, or has it been about the glory of God? Go back and read the things you've posted on Facebook. No, seriously, when you leave here, go back and read the things you've posted on Facebook. How many of them proclaim justice and mercy for the oppressed? Go back and look at where you spent your money. Seriously, open your bank statement and ask yourself, how much money have you spent helping the oppressed? Think about the conversations you've had with people, the words you have spoken. Have you used your voice to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves? Or are we so concerned with being in the right political party and having the right news source and being right that we have forgotten how to do right? Because God makes it clear in his scripture, in the Old Testament prophets and in the New. Have you read the story of the Good Samaritan? That's a story of racial injustice. The Samaritan helping the Jew and not letting what separates them, not letting their cultural differences, not letting cultural prejudices keep him from doing the right thing. Have you read Matthew 25? Where the folks that get to go into paradise are those who have helped the least of these, the oppressed, the downtrodden, the downcast. If you're asking me what to do, and you genuinely want your life to be about God, then what I would tell you is, he has told you what is good. Administer justice, practice mercy, let no one be oppressed. I'm going to close with this story, and then we'll pray and sing together for a little bit. It's a story I haven't been able to get out of my head for the last several weeks. I had a student who played football for me several years ago. I volunteered at a local middle school doing like a Bible study at lunchtime for kids. To give you an idea of this young man's kind of experience in school, it was a 4-year middle school, 5th through 8th grade. I ran the program there for 7 years, and he was in my group all 7 years. It's a 4-year middle school. Do the math, okay? He struggled. Football was really good for him. It was the first time in his life that he succeeded at something. We had some study table stuff. His grades were getting better. He finally, for the first time, he was really good, in part because he was like 15-year-old playing with 12-year-olds, and that makes a difference. But like we won games because of things that he did, and so people were giving him positive reinforcement for the first time. And football was it was like the only good thing in his life, which is why it was shocking one day when he didn't show up to a game. He just blew off. He was there at school. He was ready for school. I saw him, and he took off and went home and never came back for the game. And so I got him the next day, and I said, man, what happened? Where'd you go? And I noticed 2 things. I noticed his head drop, and I noticed some bruising. I said, what happened? He said, oh, well, you know, on Monday, Mom let her new boyfriend move in the house, and he didn't like my little brother very much. And when we left for school, he was already mad at him, and he was starting to drink. And he goes, I went home to make sure he didn't beat up my little brother. I want you to think about that for a minute. The maturity it takes for a 15 or 16-year-old young man to leave the thing he loves most in life and to put his own physical safety on the line to protect his brother because he knew his brother could not protect himself. You want to know what justice and mercy, mishpat and hesed look like? They look like that. That I will lay down my rights, I will lay down my privileges, I will lay down my resources, even if it hurts me, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Administer justice and practice mercy.